Hello, welcome everyone to our webinar and thank you for joining. Today we will be talking about SLOs and specifically what your SLOs might not be telling you about mobile. Hopefully at the end of this session, you'll have a better understanding of how you can build and monitor effective SLOs to ensure a really great mobile user experience. So just a couple of housekeeping points before we get started. First off, this webinar is being recorded and it will be available to you after the presentation. We'll be sure to share it with you all as attendees in a few days so that you can share it with your teams. And number two, all attendees are in listen-only mode right now. So if you have any questions, please ask them in the GoToWebinar chat window and we will answer at the end. If we can't get to your question due to time constraints, we will make sure to follow up with you via email. Now for a couple of intros. So my name is Verna and I'm a product marketing manager here at Embrace. I'll be one of your hosts today and I'm also joined by my colleague Christine.
Hey everyone, my name is Christine, a solutions engineer at Embrace. I've been in the mobile space almost 8 years, and I've helped customers navigate through the struggles of creating mobile SLOs.
Yeah. So as I mentioned and Christine mentioned, we're both from Embrace, but if you're not familiar with Embrace, we are a provider of mobile observability tools for the modern tech stack. And what we do is we provide SDKs that ingest unsampled data about your mobile app's health and performance. So we collect this data, we enrich, and we aggregate that data, and then we present that data in a specialized dashboard for mobile analysis. We also connect to other observability tools, which allows engineers to link their mobile and backend data for true end-to-end visibility into their app's health and performance. Also, our SDKs are all open source and they're powered by OpenTelemetry. So they are totally compatible with tons of other open source tools that ingest hotel model data, which is very cool.
So why are we here? I've seen more and more companies lean into mobile SLOs, but it's been challenging for them because one, they either don't know where to start because they don't know what to measure or how to measure it, or two, they're measuring something, but it's not really providing a clear picture of what's actually happening. So during this webinar, we'll talk through the knowledge gaps that observability teams and mobile teams have that are preventing them from creating meaningful and actionable SLOs. And after that, we'll walk through a login example and 3 easy steps on how to create a mobile SLO.
Yes, so when we think about mobile observability, just to take it a little bit higher level and where mobile SLOs specifically fit into it, we often see that organizations struggle because there are typically two distinct teams with distinct areas of expertise. So on the one hand, we have observability and DevOps teams, and they're really system-wide experts. They know how to build a process that's structured and focused on measuring and identifying issues really early before they become big incidents, right? So in other words, they are the ones who traditionally handle typical SLOs. Now, on the other hand, we have mobile teams. So they understand the chaos that is the mobile environment, the high variability of factors that are introduced by all these different devices, all these different operating systems, different environments and unpredictable user behaviors. They are the mobile experts. They're the ones that are typically fixing an issue when it goes wrong in the app. Now, the concept of mobile SLOs, which is still quite new in this space, actually falls somewhere between these two teams where their expertise sort of intersects. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of engineering organizations just kind of struggle to get mobile SLOs right. It's because they straddle these two different teams and they require a really collaborative effort on the part of both teams and the expertise of both teams to really build them and monitor them effectively.
So on top of the knowledge that both observability teams and mobile teams have to share with one another, both of these teams actually need to adjust their concept around measuring the user experience, which historically neither team has done. They've measured pieces and components of what they actually should be measuring. So typically, we see observability teams will measure API calls, and mobile teams at best will measure client-side networking calls and screen rendering times. However, when you break up this one flow of an experience into its individual components, it tells a completely different story. So you want to measure from point A to point B, which is actually the full user experience and how the user actually perceives the app. So you can see from this image, when someone is logging in to when the next screen is shown to the user, that's one experience. But for other teams, there's small individual components.
Yep. So let's talk a little bit more concretely now about SLOs and really what are the key differences when you're trying to build SLOs for DevOps versus when you're trying to build SLOs specifically for mobile. So backend and mobile are inherently very different in a couple of different ways, and this should really be reflected in how we create SLOs for mobile. So first off, what we measure when it comes to mobile will be very different versus what we might be used to measuring when building backend SLOs. So in mobile, we are interested in measuring the user experience in its entirety, as Christine was sort of talking about before, rather than isolating very specific defined amounts of work like a network response or the availability of a specific server. It's really about that end-to-end, beginning of a user flow to the end of a user flow. What do they see? What are they experiencing? Second of all, the data that we decide to include will differ for mobile versus backend SLOs. So backend environments are fairly controlled types of environments. There's not, a ton of variability that happens. And this makes sampling your data very cost effective if you want to understand what's happening. And now in contrast, the mobile environment is highly variable and incredibly unpredictable. So just think about all of the permutations created by so many different types of devices out there, different operating systems, different versions of your app, different feature experiments you might have going on, third-party SDKs you might have installed, network conditions that are quite variable. People are on Wi-Fi, people are on cellular networks, etc. And this goes without even mentioning just the sheer variety of user behaviors that we could never really predict. So with this type of variability, it just doesn't make sense to sample your data as you would when you're collecting data for backend SLOs. What you want to think about instead is prioritizing your data in a different way because there will always just be such a sheer volume of it. And that's with a focus on what data is being generated by the users, geographies, devices, et cetera, that are really driving your business goals, mainly revenue. So do you have specific types of customers or groups of customers or customers from certain geographies that are disproportionately driving your business goals? Maybe you want to prioritize the data that's coming in from these specific populations. And lastly, we want to talk about the big difference in what counts or measures as impact when it comes to mobile versus backend SLOs. So when you look at the backend, you're typically measuring the number of occurrences of an issue or an event. Now that does not translate exactly the same for mobile because in mobile we have this concept of the unique user and the unique user session. So if you have, for example, 1,000 instances of some sort of event that occurred, say it's a failure of some kind, how are you going to know if those 1,000 instances are evenly distributed across all of your users? Was it a single, very unfortunate user who experienced a failure 1,000 times, or was it 1,000 unique users who each experienced this failure just once? Um, and if you're creating your SLO purely based on the number of instances, it's not going to be possible to know this distribution. So that means your SLO is not going to be super helpful because you can't actively prioritize, what you're going to fix based off of the true impact across your entire user base. So that's why it's really important to not only measure the number of instances of something that occurred, but to measure the number of users that have actually been affected. Oh, Christine, I think you're muted.
So I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into the three things that Verna just covered and bring some insights from our customers. So as we mentioned earlier, we want to measure the user experience, not the individual pieces. So here you see the pieces of the API request sent and received, response parsing, and screen rendering. We want to measure it as a flow from point A to point B. So this accomplishes a few things. One, you actually measure what matters. Your users aren't complaining about APIs or screen rendering. They're complaining about whether or not they can complete an order. So if you want to understand how to fix the issues and understand what the users are experiencing, you should be measuring the same thing. Only then can you find areas for improvement. Two, by measuring from point A to point B, you'll actually have a drop-off rate. The API calls and the screen renderings are so short in time period, very few instances will you ever see someone drop off. But realistically, if those are your two bookends and the start and end of an experience, people will drop off between those two events. And so by getting a measure of a flow, you actually get an accurate feel for how many people actually think that it's taking too long. On mobile, people are extremely impatient. So if your login takes 3 seconds, people may leave and go to a different app or check their messages after the first second. This is actually extremely helpful information because it's your users telling you what their tolerance is. And so this is a good number to actually aspire to for your SLOs in terms of latency. And lastly, you don't get caught up in the minor details, which actually is very beneficial for observability teams and mobile teams. So instead of breaking it up into an API call and seeing if it jumps from 100 milliseconds to 200 milliseconds, which the user won't be able to perceive, you're looking at the flow in its entirety. So you're saying if the login takes longer than 2 seconds, then we need to address the login flow. So you don't have to get into the details of each individual component and whether or not it's over optimized. This also applies to the errors that can happen within this flow. I'm working with a customer right now where they're currently breaking down their errors and by country and trying to see, okay, should I prioritize this issue or not? They're doing it based on a number of occurrences rather than where it happens in the app. If it happens during checkout, if it happens during login, and the application is not responsive, it will naturally increase the latency and you'll start to see it in your mobile SLOs. Because those are high priority flows in your app, you'll prioritize them rather than high frequency issues of crashes or ANRs that occur in parts of your app that you might not care as much about. So really, by identifying this, it really helps prioritize what's important and you don't go into the minor details of things that actually don't matter. So you get a lot less noise. Mobile SLO data should be unsampled, filtered, and it will be delayed. So there's a lot that is packed into this slide. So telling observability teams not to sample feels very controversial because they're so used to sampling, and for very good reason. The data that they're measuring is relatively uniform and there are controlled environments. You can upgrade the systems when you need to. And so you sample because the incremental benefit of additional data points is quite low and it's cost effective. However, as we've talked before, the permutations on mobile reaches thousands, if not more. And there's so many unique environments that mobile users are operating in. You have your operating system, your app version, whether or not you're in low power mode, your connectivity, and the added chaos of third-party SDKs and how they interact with your app. So the incremental benefit of additional information is quite large because you can discover issues in a unique environment set that you would have never known existed. What I often see is that people will test under perfect conditions in development, and then when something gets released into production, they miss something like a slight lag in the connectivity, and that actually will cause a lot of issues. And so that's why our suggestion is to not sample the data for mobile SLOs. Instead, you want to filter. So not all of the data is relevant. For example, a lot of times teams will decide we'll only support particular new OSs. And so you want to limit the data that you are using for your mobile SLOs to those operating systems. It's not the population. If it's not the population that you want to optimize for, you don't want to include that data. Some people may even want to split SLOs for free versus paid customers. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can cut the data. Lastly, I like to remind observability teams that mobile data is sometimes delayed. And that's what this graph shows. So for app one, all of the data comes in within 1 minute. But if you look at app four, there's even a chunk where the data comes in after a day. So delayed data is not common for infrastructure backend systems, but it's very common in mobile because if a person loses connectivity, is in offline mode, which may be perfectly normal for an app, the data will come in later. And you don't necessarily want to exclude this data because it's actually the normal behavior of your user, depending on what kind of app that you have. And so the thing not to necessarily filter out is delayed data, but you may want to decide, okay, it makes sense to include data that's at max an hour delayed or a day delayed, but not longer than that. And so it's just a reminder of some of the differences between mobile and backend data that we see. And lastly, with mobile, it's always important to remember that errors and issues with latency actually affect an end user and their goal. It affects engagement with the app, it affects their ability to purchase. And that's the ultimate goal of a lot of the apps that we have. And as Verna had mentioned, to better help with prioritization, we suggest that mobile SLOs take into consideration the number of users affected. I've definitely seen instances where retry logic, terrible retry logic, is the reason for extremely high spike, but it happens in such rare instances on devices that are old that people don't care about. And those aren't the things that you should be reprioritizing your product roadmap for. So instead of just looking at the number of occurrences, which is still helpful, we should look also at the number of users that it affects.
For sure. Okay, so that was a lot of really good, helpful information. I think we want to finish off the session with just a recap and also a more concrete step-by-step guide at how we can build an SLO. So for this example, we're going to be building an SLO together with these steps to measure the health of a login flow. That's what we're going to use as our kind of template. And a login flow it's a very common type of user activity. We see it across a lot of different types of apps, and it's kind of fairly easy to understand where things start and end. So let's take a look at 3 steps towards building an SLO for login. So we've broken this process down, and let's look at step one. So, step one is let's measure the user experience. Remember, we're always very focused on what is user facing, what do they, your end users, your customers see. So, let's measure the user experience for a specific set of activity. And for this example, we're going to choose that specific set of activity to be from when a user inputs their username and password to when the next screen appears. So, a couple of do's and don'ts to consider at this stage of the process. Number one, do track the user drop off and error rates, as well as the time it takes to complete the activity in its entirety. What you don't want to do is just track the individual components separately in this flow. So, as we've kind of mentioned a few times through the session, you don't want to be focused on just tracking an API call or tracking a screen rendering. Those are not unique SLOs. They are part of the internal workings that make up an SLO, and you're going to want to dig into them when you're troubleshooting if you notice that you're violating an SLO. But in and of themselves, those technical components are not the SLO.
Step two, you want to filter your data. So focus on the supported OS versions that you have. Your team may even want to split out the timing for free versus paid user. What you don't want to do is sample the data. Instead, filter the data. And lastly, you're actually going to break the SLO up. And so I have 3 recommendations for what the SLO would be. First is taking a look at the number of recurrences. So 99.5% of logins are completed without error. You would likely exclude errors such as incorrect username and password. Second is looking at the users. So 99.9% of users with completed logins are completed without error. And the last looks at latency. Of completed logins, 99% of logins finish within 2 seconds. These are numbers that we've just made up because it's actually most important to establish a baseline first. You don't want to arbitrarily set it at 99.5. And honestly, because mobile SLOs are relatively new, it might not even be in the 99 range. And so what we suggest teams to do is to set up a baseline because you don't want these SLOs firing off all of the time, or you don't want it to be such a such a far off goal that it will never get triggered. The other thing that isn't necessarily an SLO, which I mentioned before, is that we do want to measure the time it takes for people to drop off any particular flow, because that's what you want to end up aspiring to. Your SLO may start at 2 seconds and your users may drop off at the 1 second mark. You know that to really optimize that flow, that's what the team should aim for because that's the tolerance of a mobile user.
Awesome. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the session on what your SLOs aren't telling you and how to build better ones for mobile. I think we have time for a couple of questions, so let's see what you guys asked in the chat box. Okay, looks like we have a question. Someone said, I understand we want to track user flow, but how do you know where to go if it's slow? Christine, do you want to take that one?
Yeah. So this is a great question. I suggest that people start off easy. I typically would break the flow up into 2 pieces. One where it tracks the API call, and the second is everything else. So that may include the JSON parsing and the screen rendering. And to monitor that data for a little bit, and you see which component contributes more to the slowness of the SLO. After you see that data, then you can break it out into smaller pieces. But at first, break it into two pieces just to understand, is it the API call or is it everything else? And then from there, do multiple iterations. It's a process, but it makes it easier to just get started and have an idea of what's going on with your app.
Nice, thank you. So another question that we have, I think this is a good one. What have you seen at companies that have successfully had mobile SLOs?
Yeah, this is team buy-in across different teams. So I'm talking about the observability team, the mobile team, and the backend team, and that they're all bought into this process. That's actually the best indicator of successful mobile SLOs because once you have this, it becomes much easier that everyone has agreed that the user experience is important and they're all invested in improving it. This process takes a while to establish, and so there are multiple iterations where you will find that the process doesn't take this into consideration or the process doesn't take that into consideration. But if everyone is bought into the concept that the user experience is important and they want to improve it, it really sets up this whole entire process for success.
Nice, absolutely. Yeah, we talked so much through this whole session about the user experience. What are they seeing? What are they experiencing and prioritizing that? So I like that answer. Um, I think that just looking at time, that might be all the questions we have time for right now. But if you guys asked a question in the chat box and we didn't get to it, please be assured we will for sure follow up with you via email. And yeah, lastly, thank you. So, thank you all for joining us today. We really enjoyed talking with you about mobile SLOs, introducing you to Embrace, to ourselves. If you would like a more in depth exploration of mobile SLOs, we definitely have other resources for you. Please do go to our website, embrace.io, and download our free mobile SLOs guidebook. It gives you a lot more detail, quite a detailed breakdown into SLO best practices and more step-by-step instructions and templates on how to, get started with mobile SLOs if you're kind of new. And yeah, that's definitely a good resource for you. So thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you at our next webinar.
Thanks, everyone.